Please note that today's webinar is the fourth and final installment of our Help I Found a Kitten series. My name is Brianna Lovell, Outreach and Events Associate here at Alley Cat Allies, and I am delighted to introduce today's session presented by our friends at Feline Outreach, Rescue, and Education, a nonprofit organization which provides training to shelters and rescues on increasing the survival rates of rescued kittens. We are joined now by the co-founders of Feline ORE, Susan Spalding and Rosemary Crawford. Together, they have more than 40 years of experience caring for neonatal and sick kittens in shelters and as foster care providers. Along with other Feline ORE instructors, they teach classes around the country and present workshops at local and national conferences. Your speaker today is Rosemary Crawford. Rosemary has been working and volunteering in animal welfare for almost 20 years. She is a licensed veterinary technician and has served as a foster coordinator in both public and private shelters, as well as a medical staff member in a high-volume open-access shelter where she worked with a veterinarian to provide for the animal's medical and surgical needs. As a volunteer, Rosemary responds with several national organizations following disasters and also teaches emergency sheltering and animal first aid. She currently works at a large veterinary practice in Northern Virginia and continues to foster ill or injured kittens for local shelters and rescue organizations. Helping to moderate today's webinar and answer your questions is Susan Spalding. As we move through the webinar, please submit your questions using the questions panel. There's a lot of information to cover, and there are a lot of you out there listening, so we will do our very best to answer as many questions as we can. If we are unable to answer your question today, just send an email to Susan or Rosemary via the address information provided during this presentation, and they will get back to you. You may also submit your questions directly to Alley Cat Allies by visiting www.alleycat.org/response. Just fill out our online form, which will connect you with the resources and information you need to help the cats in your community. Just click on the Advice About Cats button to get started. And now, for just a touch of housekeeping, please note that you can hear us during this webinar, but we cannot hear you. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to access and share the recorded version anytime for free by visiting www.alleycat.org/webinar. Lastly, and this is an important one, later today you will all receive a follow-up email with a link to a brief survey. Your feedback is incredibly important to us as we continue to grow and develop new training opportunities for the future. So please keep an eye out for that email and consider submitting your survey response. So that's about enough from me. Let's hand it over to Rosemary.
Thank you, Brianna, for that nice introduction, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. As Brianna mentioned, this is the fourth webinar in a series of 4, and it kind of comes full circle discussing what you can do to help others who have questions. A little bit about ourselves. We are Feline Outreach, Rescue, and Education. As Brianna said, we're a nonprofit, all-volunteer group, and our mission is to provide training on feline care, particularly on kitten care, to shelters, volunteers, rescue groups, fosters, veterinary staff, pretty much anyone who needs information on kitten care. We develop educational materials for the general public and for shelters, rescues, veterinary clinics, etc. And although we are not a group that takes in kittens or adopts them out, almost all of our volunteers regularly foster for local shelters and rescues in their area. And this fourth point is especially important for today because we like to promote cooperation and information sharing among shelter and rescue personnel, and today veterinary clinic personnel as well. The information that you've gained through the series of webinars and that you get today, hopefully you can pass on to people who are calling to your shelter or to your veterinary clinic asking for advice on what they should do when they find a kitten. And just to add a bit to that disclaimer page, please understand this presentation is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional veterinary care. Those of you who are in a veterinary clinic, you are that professional veterinary care, and as you know, it's important if you can have a person who's found a kitten be able to come in and have that kitten seen by a veterinary professional. Sometimes that's not always possible right at the moment, so the information provided is to help you help them in the meantime. Prescription medication should only be used under the direction of a veterinarian, and Feline Outreach Rescue and Education recommends establishing a veterinary relationship to guide all medical treatment options, including non-prescription and supportive therapies. So those of you who are talking to others about what they should do with their kitten, please encourage them as well to establish a veterinary relationship to help them along the path. So a quick overview of today. We're going to be talking about being able to ask the right questions and to best be able to help the kitten and the caregiver of that kitten based on getting the answers to the questions and knowing where they are and what kind of information those people are going to need when they call in. To do that, we need to understand the person who's calling in and who has found the kitten, perhaps finding out more specifically what that person needs to know and what that person is able to do for the kitten. Preparing those on your staff who will be talking to the public, who will be kind of the first line of answering phone calls or emails when people call in and say they have kitten questions. We'll spend a majority of the time on actual topics and specific questions that come up very commonly in our veterinary practice and in shelters, that people have found kittens, they need to know what to do about specific neonatal concerns, and also we get several questions about pregnant mothers, nursing queens, and their kittens. So those are going to be the majority of our time, and then at the end I'll have a list of resources available for you that you can use for your own self and that you can also direct those who are calling for your help. You can direct them to those resources as well. Before we move further, we're curious to know about the attendees, and we have a poll question to find out a little bit more about you and if you come from a veterinary clinic, shelter staff, etc. So Brianna has the question. Any last responses, and we'll see who's out there listening. Thanks again for joining us.
Looks like we have just about everyone. I'm going to a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now.
Wow, those are excellent. I'm so glad to see that we have a wide variety of people attending today. The 50% rescue and independent fosters, that's wonderful. People, the general public, when they know that you work with animals and work with kittens, they're going to think and assume and want you to know everything about kittens and to be able to help them when they have questions. Can't tell you how many times neighbors will stop by and say, hey, I found this, I found that. And since you're involved with animals and animal rescue, you can tell me how to save whatever critter it is that they happen to find. So now you'll have some answers to be able to answer their questions about neonatal kittens. Okay, we'll move back into the webinar. And when I talk to people about helping other people help kittens and being able to answer questions over the phone, I get the question from them, how can I possibly explain to someone over the phone all that's needed to care for a kitten? And that's an excellent question, and it really is problematic and probably not really possible to explain everything over the phone unless you have several hours to do so. But just being able to answer a question or two that someone calls in with and being able to provide them with the basic essential information about kitten care, even if it's a 5 or 10-minute phone call or a short email, is going to go a long way to saving the life of that kitten or to providing the best care possible for that kitten so it can thrive in its environment. Foster experience is great, but it's not necessary to be able to answer other people's questions. If you have a good understanding of the information you can relay that on to the other people. And again, I encourage everyone, if you've not yet attended webinars 1, 2, and 3, there is a wealth of information in those 3 webinars that are going to be valuable for answering questions for people. We're going to talk about asking the right questions about the caregiver and about the kitten. And I encourage you to provide more than simply the 1 or 2 answers to the questions that someone asks. People sometimes are reluctant to call in with questions. They think they might be taking up too much of your time, or they might think that their question isn't a very important one, or they don't want to seem like they don't know something. So it's really important to make that caller feel comfortable and understand that they might only ask 1 question, but they might have 5 questions. So by providing a little bit extra information about the basic points of care for kittens, you're going to be better assured that that kitten is going to need the help that it really needs. So first of all, then, who's asking for help? Most of the questions that we get at the shelter, at the clinic, are from general public. They found a kitten. They're calling in. Sometimes they're calling in because they're looking for advice on if they should even try to hand raise this kitten, or if they should turn it over to a shelter or rescue group. So finding out who that person is and what that person is able to do and what that person wants to do for the kitten is going to be valuable. Ask them if they've had any prior experience raising kittens. And also, are they able to provide for 24-hour care? If there's someone who has to be gone at work all day and they're going to be gone for 8 or 10 hours or longer, that's not going to be a situation that's going to be good for the kitten. These neonatal kittens need to be looked in on every couple hours, more often if they're very young or if they're very fragile. And so how their work schedule is going to be important. Sometimes it's great when you have people who work at home, stay-at-home moms. That's wonderful for providing that 24-hour care. Then ask the person, do they have access to the needed supplies and to medical assistance? For example, do they have a pet supply store nearby that they can get the things they need? Do they have transportation available? And also, if they needed to get to a veterinarian, are they able to do that? Now, there's the issue of money for supplies and medical assistance. And you don't want to have to come right out and say, well, can you afford to raise this kitten? But if you put some numbers out there so the person can better decide for themselves if they have the means to provide for this kitten. Some supplies at the pet store are going to cost, maybe it's going to be about $30 for KMR, or a kitten milk replacer. Could be more, could be a little bit less, depending on the age of that kitten and how long it's going to need to be on the milk replacer. A snuggle safe, a carrier, someplace to house the animal, the kitten, and also medical assistance. If something happens and they need to see a veterinarian, there's going to be an exam cost. You might be looking at $50 there, and perhaps additional for medications that the kitten might need. So if you kind of put those numbers out there without asking if they can actually afford it, they can decide for themselves if this is something they want to do. Another thing that's becoming very common, and we're thrilled that it's becoming more and more common, is that shelters and rescue groups and even some veterinary clinics now are creating kitten care kits that they can have available for people who find kittens, and it has the necessary supplies in there so that people don't have to go and buy those supplies. Part of the problem that shelters always have to deal with is space and the overwhelming number of kittens that are relinquished to the shelter. The kitten has a much better chance, if there's no room at the shelter, this kitten has a better chance to at least be helped by someone who is willing to try to be a foster if those supplies can be provided for that person. And then when the kitten is old enough for adoption, they're often able to bring them back to the shelter at that point for adoption. So in that kitten care kit, if your shelter or rescue or veterinary clinic can put together like a carrier, preferably a medium-sized carrier, not the tiniest kitten carrier, and preferably one that opens from the top. Some formula, kitten milk replacer formula, a bottle or two, a heating device, some soft bedding like some fleece blankets, and oftentimes people can provide the bedding themselves, and also a scale. A scale is going to be very important for monitoring how well that kitten is doing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Also in the general public questions, does the person have access to an internet? Because you're not going to be able to answer, as we said, all of the questions the person might have. And they might have other questions come up that they didn't even know they were going to have. So being able to reference things on the internet will be helpful for them. If the person is a foster parent for a local shelter or rescue, I encourage you to have them follow up with their shelter or rescue. They might be calling you or asking you the questions because perhaps they've tried to contact their organization. Maybe it's after hours, maybe they're waiting for someone to get back to them and they're really worried about this kitten. And so being able to answer the initial question that they have that's causing them concern at that time will be valuable to them, and it's valuable to that kitten, of course. Finally, you might want to follow up with them. Ask for their email address or their phone number if they're willing to give you that. And that way, if you remember something else that you want to include that you didn't get to talk about, or you're just curious and you want to see how that kitten is doing, you'll be able to follow up. Next, who's going to be answering these questions? It's great if you can have 2 or 3 people in your organization available at any time to answer questions. In a veterinary clinic, sometimes the veterinarians, the veterinary technicians are busy helping other animals with other appointments, and someone calls in. So it's important to know what it's important for the front staff to also know. They might be the first ones answering the question. If they're answering the phone, and if they can answer those questions without having to refer it to a veterinarian or a veterinary technician, that's going to be beneficial all the way around. Anyone, front desk clinics at shelters, clinics, animal control, volunteers in a shelter. Sometimes people might come in, they don't want to ask someone at the front desk, but someone's socializing kitties, and they'll approach that volunteer with questions. Help desk people who are answering phones and emails. Social media managers are great sources to know what's going on about kittens. There might be a question posted on Facebook, and other people might be chiming in to answer that question, and it's important that the social media manager can follow those comments and make sure that they're accurate and that the people are getting the best advice possible. And although it's not possible to train everyone on kitten care, and there may be some people in your organization who would rather work with other older animals or dogs instead of kittens, at least have those people know which person to forward the phone call to or the email question to, so that the appropriate person can follow up. So getting the basic information. So if someone has called, help, I found a kitten, now what do I do? There's some important questions to ask so that we can understand the condition of the kitten and what's going on, and so that we can have the correct answers. So ask the caller when the kitten was found and where it was found. So it might have been found 5 minutes ago, or it might have been found last night after the clinic and the shelter was closed, and they've had that kitten for 8 or 10 or 12 hours, and they're finally now being able to ask the questions they have. There's decisions to make on if the kitten was just recently found. If it's plump and it was found in a safe environment, it's probably that mama just went out to hunt. And decisions need to be made if you're going to leave the kitten with mama for a while and let her take care of it and nurse it until it's a little bit older, maybe be able to keep an eye on it if it's in your own backyard in a nice safe place. Or are you going to take the kitten and hand raise it? There are lots of resources out there, and certainly visit Alley Cat Allies for community cat information. The location and the environment that the kitten is in are both very important. Not just the town that it was in or the street that it was found on, but what was its environment like? Was it in a sewer drain? Was it in a gully? Was it in a wood pile? Is it all wet because it's been raining? Does it seem to have any chemical smells on it? Is it the middle of summer and it was found on black pavement in a parking lot? That's going to help us to assess what kind of condition that kitten might be in. Then, if it's been found longer than just recently and they've had it for a little while, ask the people who are calling in, what have they done with the kitten? Have they fed it? And if they did feed it, what did they feed it? Again, if you access some of the earlier webinars, some of the things that people feed can cause some upset stomachs and some diarrhea perhaps for that kitten. So it's important to know what the kitten's already gotten. And how are they housing that kitten? Is it in a carrier? Is it the right temperature? Is it too warm or too cold? Kittens can't regulate their own temperature when they're very young, so we need to provide a source of heat for them. And then after we get through some of those basic questions, we do need to assess the age and condition of the kitten. And for purposes of the webinar, I've had to break them up into topics that are together, but of course if there's a serious injury with the kitten, you're not going to spend 5 minutes finding out about the collar. You're going to interweave these questions together in a conversational way. At this point, actually, speaking of other webinars, let's find out with our second poll question, how many of the attendees today have been able to access the previous webinars or who have joined us for the previous webinars. So there's a new question up there. If you take a moment to go ahead and answer, and then we'll get back to the webinar. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to give you just a couple more seconds, so please check all that apply. Let us know. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and close it. Here are our results.
Okay, so some of you have joined us before. I'm glad to see that. And for those of you who have not yet joined us for the previous webinars, I do encourage you to go back and check those out at your convenience. You can do that by logging on to the Alleycat Allies website, as Brianna mentioned earlier. There's really a wealth of information, and once you view those webinars, this webinar will also make a little bit more sense because, as I said, it is the fourth in the series, and it's kind of a culmination of all of the information again. So when we get back to determining the kitten's age, there are some physical characteristics and behavioral characteristics that we can look at that will help us determine their age. And this is a major portion of the first webinar, so I can't spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to review just very quickly 2 of the slides that are in webinar number 1. Excuse me, webinar number 1, and there is additional information in that webinar. So in this first slide, determining the kitten's age, this is for the very, very young kittens. And up at the top, please note, weight alone is not an accurate indicator of age. And that is very important. So often people will say, oh, well, the kitten weighs 12 ounces, it must be about 3 weeks old. But often in rescue, we get kittens that are debilitated or that have not had good nutrition along the way. And you could have a 12-ounce kitten that's actually maybe 5 or 6 weeks old, but is actually emaciated or hasn't had very good nutrition. So weight alone is not a good indicator of age, and we have to look at these other items that are listed there at the bottom of the page as well. Healthy kittens, you can see in this picture there's an umbilical cord still on this kitten. It looks to be dry, and that tells you that it's probably at least a day old, but less than 5 days old. And this one looks pretty plump and happy there. Next, since weight alone is not a determiner of age, we want to look at the teeth of the kitten. If you can get the kitten to smile for you like this, that's great. Sorry, I get the slide for you. And looking at the teeth is going to give you a more accurate determination of age. I do need to remind you to caution those who are looking into the mouth, if you're doing it or you're telling someone else how to do it, caution when examining the mouth. If the kitten has teeth in there, little kitten teeth are like little needles, and they're very sharp, and although it is quite rare for such young kittens to have rabies, it is possible, so we do need to guard ourselves as well. But also just to avoid getting bit accidentally. So you can lift the lips from the side. You can use a tongue depressor, a popsicle stick, the non-writing side of a pen. Try to get the kitten to open up its mouth and take a little look in there. As with all animals, and especially kittens who don't yet have a well-developed immune system, please make sure that you wash your hands and that anything that you are going to try to examine their mouth with is very clean, so you're not introducing something that could cause them disease. So assessing the kitten's condition, one of the first questions I have when I'm talking with people is, does it seem like the kitten has any obvious injuries to you or any obvious illness? You know, if they're bleeding, if they're discharged from anywhere, does the kitten have limbs that seem to be pointing not the right direction? Is there nasal discharge, vomiting, diarrhea? You can ask the people if the kitten looks plump, like in that previous picture, or does the kitten have kind of sunken cheeks, rib cage showing, the belly area very sunken, it might be thin and starving. It's important to know about the kitten's hydration. And you can explain to people over the phone how to just check one easy check of hydration. It's not the only check. But if they were to scruff the kitten kind of low on the neck and above the shoulder blades, kind of hold the kitten as if it were standing, even if it can't stand yet, hold it as if it's standing on all fours, and then pull that skin up ever so slightly and gently up behind the neck. And it should spring back very quickly, within 2 seconds. If it's slow to spring back and get back into place, or if it remains standing, that kitten needs to see a veterinarian right away. Dehydration is a very serious problem for young kittens. And then is the kitten alert or responsive? Older kittens, older than 6 weeks or so, are going to be looking at their environment. They're going to see things around them. They're going to be looking at things even 20 feet away. And they'll be able to follow a toy or follow a finger with their eyes and look interested in it. But younger kittens, obviously, if they're still too young to even have their eyes open, they're not going to be looking alert in that way. So what we need to do with young kittens is, again, hold them from the scruff like the mama would hold them. So again, in that same area, low on the neck, behind the neck, over the shoulder blades, and hold them up and see if they pull their back legs into themselves and try to curl themselves up into a ball. Healthy kittens should do that, just like when their mama carries them. It makes it easier for her to carry. If they're just laying limp and their legs are hanging down like a rag doll, that's serious, and they need to see seek veterinary attention right away. Also, the temperature. A kitten should not feel cold to the touch. Our hands are already cooler than our core body temperature. Kittens should be 100, 101 degrees, so they should feel slightly warm if you were to put their abdomen on your belly. And likewise, if they feel very hot, and maybe it's the case they're found in the summertime on that black pavement, we might have hyperthermia going on, and they need to seek medical attention. Again, much more information on assessment and immediate care of kittens is available in webinar number 1. Okay, one of the main questions and concerns we get is what and how should I feed the kitten? Mostly it's usually just what should I feed the kitten, but we as advocates for that kitten need to make sure that the people know how to feed the kitten and actually how to provide for its general care. So this is what I was talking about when you answer the individual question that the person has, but then make sure they also know the information on this slide. So very, very important is that the kitten is receiving kitten milk replacer formula. There are lots of things out on the market. There's people try to feed regular human milk, sometimes even human baby formula, other formulas for other animals, but it needs to be kitten milk replacer formula to have the right nutrition, the right amount of calories, the right ingredients for that kitten to thrive. There are many good brands on the market, some of them KMR, GNC, Breeder's Edge, Just Born. Just make sure that's true kitten milk replacer. My caution is that inevitably we not unfrequently get people who think that they're feeding kitten milk replacer, but what they're really feeding are those boxes of cat milk that are available at the pet supply stores. And cat milk is a treat that's meant for older cats to just have something that tastes like milk. It doesn't have the nutrition or the calories needed for a kitten to grow. And it's very, very sad when people are trying to do the right thing and they think they're doing the right thing, and the kitten is eating and they're feeding the kitten on schedule, but the kitten is not gaining weight and it starts to actually fade. And to find out that they're feeding a cat treat that really doesn't have the nutrition, the kitten's been eating and has been literally starving to death despite being fed all the time. And it's such a sad thing. So I actually have people read me the label on the container and describe what the container looks like to them, so we know that they're feeding the right formula. And then that formula needs to be mixed correctly and follow the label instructions on the formula, and it needs to be the right temperature. Again, kittens are a little bit warmer than us, so the milk, when it's dribbled on our wrist, should feel warm but not hot. They need to be fed correctly in a prone position that's on their stomach, like this little kitten is. There are some things that are black and white in kitten care, and feeding them on their stomach is one of them. People sometimes think, well, you feed it like a baby, like a human baby on its back, or isn't it cute if it's taking the bottle and it's on its back? But that's actually very dangerous for kittens. They can aspirate the milk into their lungs, which can be dangerous and potentially deadly. And even if they only aspirate a little bit of milk into their lungs, that can turn into an infection and turn into pneumonia and be life-threatening a little bit later on. The bottle is preferred for feeding. If the kitten is really debilitated or weak, you may need to have that person use a syringe for a while, and it might be that the person is going to have to feed that kitten like a milliliter every hour for 24 hours and give that kitten a little bit stronger. And what tends to happen is that eventually the kitten will start to suckle on the syringe and pull that plunger right in, and that's a sign that you know the kitten is getting stronger and is probably willing and more able to be able to switch over to the bottle again. Feeding the correct amount and frequency, and in a moment we'll have a chart for you that you can use and that you can refer other people to as well to help guide them how much food and how often the kitten should eat. And a lot of people don't realize that you have to stimulate a kitten to urinate and defecate. And this is something that has to be done with every feeding. It's not something that people can do once or twice a day. It has to be with every feeding. And finally, they need to keep the kitten clean and warm, and once a day at least use a warm, damp washcloth to kind of clean off around the kitten's face and then also at the kitten's rear end. Make sure it's just a little bit damp because we don't want to leave the kitten cold and wet. We want to make sure the kitten is dry afterwards and that he or she is kept warm. And here's the amount guidelines. Again, this is guidelines. Some kittens are going to need a little bit more. Some kittens are going to need a little bit less. And this is also where having that scale is going to be very, very important. The kitten should show weight gain every single day, at least a quarter of an ounce, a half an ounce. As they get bigger, they're going to have a little bit more weight gain every day. But there should be weight gain every single day. So you can refer to this as, again, guidelines. This is available after the webinar as a handout as well. So another big question we get is, I can't get the kitten to take the bottle. And almost always, I'm glad to say, it's because the kitten is old enough to not need a bottle. This is where being able to age the kitten appropriately comes into play. If there's a mouthful of teeth in there, the kitten is not going to be nursing from the bottle and is going to be transitioning to wet food. So ask the people who've called in, go ahead and offer the kitten some wet food and see what happens. And a lot of times the kitten goes right for the wet food and we don't have to worry why he's not taking the bottle. Sometimes it's that this kitten is not yet hungry. This is especially true if the kitten is plump, like in that first picture. It's just recently been found. Mama's been taking good care of it. She's been nursing it, and she just went to go hunt and get some food for herself. And so the kitten was just recently fed and isn't hungry. So you can put a little drop of the KMR on its tongue and let the kitten taste it. It might not like it because it doesn't taste like mom, it doesn't smell like mom, and they might not be willing to take the bottle. But wait, try again another hour, try again another hour after that. If the kitten is tasting that kitten milk replacer every time and eventually hasn't been eating but is eventually becoming hungry, the kitten will kind of have the light bulb go on and go, okay, I guess this is what I'm going to get. And so they tend to get to the bottle then once they get a little bit more hungry and maybe even 6 or 8 hours. Be the wrong size or have the wrong size opening. Many people don't realize that most nipples do not come with openings in them, and we have to create the opening. We recommend using a razor blade or a very sharp scissor to very, very carefully slice off the full slices until you get the appropriate sized hole. If you fill the bottle even with water and you hold it upside down with thumb on one side and 2 fingers on the other, and you're not really squeezing the bottle, 1 drop of liquid should come out approximately every 2 or 3 seconds, and that's a good size for a young kitten to nurse from. They'll be able to get enough without working too hard, and yet they won't get too much too fast. Again, the temperature is going to be important for the formula. Surprisingly, bottles cool down pretty quickly, and it might be the right temperature at first, but has become cool and needs to be warmed up again. There's a handout that's available for reasons my kitten or your kitten may not nurse and what to do about it, and that will be accessible at the LA Cat Allies website after this as well. Finally, if those items don't work, it might be that the kitten truly is ill or dehydrated or cold. And if it's dehydrated or cold, it cannot eat. It's going to have physical difficulty being able to do that. If the electrolytes are off, the little muscles aren't going to work well around its mouth. If it's cold, it's important not to feed the kitten. That could be dangerous for it as well. And of course, if it's ill, it needs to be seen by a veterinarian. There's more information in webinar number 1 about stabilizing kittens when you first find them. Another question is that the kitten hasn't had a bowel movement. Again, this is something that some people don't realize, that the kitten needs to be stimulated to have bowel movements and to urinate when they're very young. And again, something that should happen every time. They should be stimulated every time. There'll probably be a little bit of urine every time, but a bowel movement will probably only happen once every day to every 2 days, preferably every day. So is the person stimulating the kitten, and are they stimulating for long enough? 20 or 30 seconds isn't long enough. Sometimes it'll take 2 or 3 minutes. The kitten will start to, they'll be able to feel that the kitten is pushing on its abdominal muscles, and encourage the person to continue stimulating if the kitten is pushing. If it's been 3 or 4 minutes of stimulating and the kitten is pushing and nothing is coming out, go ahead and give it a break. At the next feeding, maybe that stool will have moved down a little bit further, and perhaps it will come out at the next time that the kitten is stimulated. If the kitten hasn't been eating very much, if it was just found and it's been emaciated and food is just getting it back into its system, it's maybe a day or 2 before they have their first bowel movement again. Find out what the kitten's been eating and what the stool, if it previously had diarrhea, the person might be adding in some rice cereal or something to firm up that stool. There's more information in webinar 3 about that. And if they've been using rice cereal or other binders, they need to stop using those. They can add in a little Laxatone or Furball lubricants that are given orally. Give that 10 or 12 hours. See if the kitten's able to have a bowel movement in that amount of time. If that hasn't happened, they can also try a warm water kind of butt bath where the kitten is just submerged, just the rear end area, in some warm water and stimulate it underwater for 4 or 5 minutes to see if they can get that bowel movement to happen. In webinar number 2, there's very important information about bathing a kitten and how to get it dry and how to keep it from getting chilled when it does have a bath. So please access that webinar for additional information if you're giving a butt bath to the kitten. The stool of a kitten should be toothpaste consistency and medium brown. If it's been more than 2 days, or if the kitten continues to strain and nothing comes out, the kitten needs to be seen by a veterinarian. It might need an enema. And just a word again, human enemas are not safe for felines. So it has to be a veterinary formula enema or an enema that's specifically formulated for kittens, so bring the kitten to a veterinarian. Okay, the kitten starts to eat but then stops. This could be the milk temperature, as I mentioned. It might have cooled off. We recommend having a very hot cup of water sitting next to where you're feeding the kitten. And when you're taking breaks, when you're stimulating the kitten to urinate and defecate, go ahead and put that bottle back in the really, really hot or very, very warm water so that it doesn't cool off anymore and can actually keep the milk the right temperature. Make sure you do test it on your wrists so that it's not too hot. The feeding method. If a kitten is being fed from a syringe or an eyedropper, it could be that the kitten is somewhat frustrated at having to stop every milliliter or so to wait for you to refill it. That's why we recommend also feeding from a bottle. The kitten can take the amount that it needs and wants and is not stopped unless you think that the kitten is just trying to gulp too much too quickly and you feel like it needs to have a little break and be burped. But what happens with the syringe is the kitten might be hungry to start, and then it gets enough that it's maybe not hungry anymore, but it hasn't been the right amount for the kitten. It's really not full enough and really should have more formula, but it's tired and it stops eating because of that. A common one is that the bottle is too rigid. 15, 20 years ago, the bottles were really very pliable, and as the kitten suckled, it would kind of suck the bottle in, and the bottle would collapse onto itself. And the bottles now are much more firm, and the kitten can suckle and suckle, but the bottle doesn't collapse inwards, and so you kind of get this vacuum effect thing where the kitten really can't get any more milk out. So stopping and letting some air back into the bottle can help offset that, and the kitten might drink a little bit more. But what's even better is if you just loosen the cap of the bottle ever so slightly. The cap should not be put on so tight that you can't turn it anymore. In fact, when you're putting the cap back on the bottle, just make it tight enough so it just starts to catch, and air will be able to get in through that section where the bottle is screwed on. And when the kitten is nursing, you should see very tiny little bubbles of air coming up into the bottle, replacing the milk that the kitten is drinking. Again, the nipple might not be the right size, or the opening is too small. If you're providing nipples and bottles in a kitten care kit, we encourage you to go ahead and make the opening in the nipple ahead of time, so that's one more thing you don't have to explain to the people how to do or that they have to worry about doing. The kitten might be teething, and when teeth are coming in, the shape of the mouth physically changes, and so how the kitten used to be able to grab hold of that nipple and create a seal is being interfered with by the shape of the mouth. So it might take a little adjusting when the kitten's teeth are just starting to come in. You might need to put the nipple a little further in, take the nipple a little bit further out, but if you play with it a little bit and work with your kitten, you will find the sweet spot where the kitten is able to eat again. The kitten may be uncomfortable. It needs to burp, urinate, or defecate, so take a break, do those things to see if that helps. And the kitten might be too warm or too cold. If it was all snuggly in its bed and it was time to eat and you've taken him out of the carrier to eat, make sure you've got him wrapped in some warm towels so that there's a source of heat there so that the kitten doesn't get chilled. The kitten might also be too tired or too weak. It might be tired and just not awake enough, and it's kind of falling asleep as it's eating. You might need to kind of stir it around a little bit and wake him up so that he's wanting to eat a little bit more. Or it might be that he's very, very weak and becomes physically tired because of his weakness. And this is going to be a kitten who's going to need smaller amounts of food on a more frequent basis, and then he's going to need to be stimulated to urinate and defecate, and then left alone to sleep and gain some energy. Finally, the kitten may be distracted. If there's several kittens in the litter, I encourage you to take one kitten out at a time to nurse rather than having all of them together, because if the other ones are walking over the kitten or running into it, the kitten may lose its hold on the nipple and not be able to suckle. So what if the kitten acts like it wants a bottle, but it gets the bottle and it chews on the nipple? There we go, slide advanced, sorry. Often it's because the kitten is teething or has enough teeth in there that it's time to start transitioning to wet food. Some kittens will actually go straight from the bottle to very small dry kibble, and if that's the case, make sure that the kibble is small enough and that the kitten isn't having trouble swallowing it. But go ahead and offer some wet food to the kitten. Don't let them chew on the nipple. If it's just a matter of a little bit of gnawing just so they can get the right position of the nipple in their mouth, that's okay. But if they're actually chewing, you need to stop that, remove that nipple from their mouth so they don't bite it off and ingest it. Offer the wet food to the kitten. Use a small spoon or a tongue depressor. Again, be careful using, well, don't use fingers to offer the food, because when the kitten decides that this food tastes pretty tasty and wants to have more, they often go chomp, and again, those tiny little needle teeth can break your skin very easily. And if you review webinar number 2, there's lots of additional information on weaning and how to get them to wean, issues that come up during weaning, and ways to make that process easier. Then we have the kittens who are eating but not gaining weight. And again, the scale is so important. Kittens should show weight gain every day. If there's weight loss or lack of weight gain, it's often the first and sometimes the only sign that something is not right with that kitten. Hopefully, it's just a matter of getting the right amount of food or the right formula of food, and it could be easily corrected. So that guideline of how much to feed and how often to feed is going to be important to make sure that people are feeding often enough and that they're feeding the right formula. Again, make sure that they're not feeding cat milk or some other formula. It needs to be kitten milk replacer formula. Find out, too, what the kitten's stool is like. Is it not gaining weight and it also happens to have diarrhea? Is the person maybe feeding too often and causing some of that diarrhea, and everything's getting pushed through the kitten's system and it's not getting enough time to absorb the nutrients that it needs? That could certainly be a cause for not gaining weight. You may want to suggest adding in some probiotics like Fortiflora or Benevac. Again, that's discussed in webinars 1 and 3 to help with digestion. Now, if it's not just a matter of the amount that the kitten's being fed or the frequency that the kitten's being fed, there could be an underlying illness. And again, sometimes the illness isn't apparent right away, but the weight loss will be your first sign that something is not right. And then I want to make sure we spend a few minutes before we run out of time on common questions and concerns that we get about pregnant mama cats and nursing cats and what to do for them and for their kittens. And this could be a webinar in and of itself, but there are some really important basics that people need to be aware of. First of all, make sure that the mama cat is going to have a place that she's comfortable both physically and psychologically. So the people are going to want to give her a birthing area. It might be a large crate, it might be a small bathroom. Some people are willing to give up a portion of their closet, but let people know that it can be a pretty messy situation, and they're going to want to protect the area. So if it's possible to have mama in a large cage where she has plenty of room, that the litter box is far enough from the food, and there's also room for an additional birthing box and just room in general to move around even if she's not in a box. Something of that size would be nice. And then that way when she does give birth, it's contained, you know where she's at, she hasn't gone and hid someplace behind a chair in your house. The next point, I cannot stress enough, the mama cat needs to have no clumping litter. It needs to be just the regular clay litter. For whatever reason, even if you provide them a wonderful birthing box, they sometimes like to have their kittens in the litter box. Or sometimes even if they use their birthing box, they'll quickly move the kitten into the litter box. So this could be very dangerous with today's clumping litter, and the litters are getting even more and more clumpable, and you see the ones that say hard clumping and fast acting. And what happens is the kittens can get kind of cemented together. They can have the clumping litter stick to them because they're wet. They can get it stuck to their nose and their mouth and not be able to breathe. If there are several kittens together, they've got the wet umbilical cords. It can be a tangled up mess of kittens. somewhat cemented together, and getting them apart can be very problematic and dangerous for them. Not to mention that they're also getting chilled in this clumping litter. So please, please, please make sure, even way before you think the mama cat is going to give birth, even 2 weeks ahead of time, get rid of the clumping litter and don't bring it back until the kittens are at least 6 to 8 weeks old, because they're going to be exploring their world with their mouth, and we also don't want them ingesting clumping litter along the way. Next, we suggest that you have several layers of newspaper or towels and bedding. This is going to make it easier for after the birthing process. It's going to be a little bit messy, it's going to be a bit wet, and if you can just roll up the top 2 or 3 layers of cloth or newspaper that got wet, and then scoot mama over to the other side of her area and finish rolling up those top 2 or 3 layers, and know that there's still 4 or 5 layers underneath, you don't have to completely remove mama and the kittens to switch out her bedding and to give her a clean area again. She's going to appreciate it. It's going to be much easier all the way around to do it this way. If you're not present for the birth, please make sure that you do check in the bedding very well, that a kitten hasn't nestled its way in between towels and blankets before they get washed. Next, also tell the people who are concerned about mama and giving birth that they have the phone number of the veterinary clinic and the driving directions for in case they need to seek help for mama if she's having problems with delivery. If the clinic that they would normally go to is not a 24-hour facility, they should also have the phone number and driving directions of an emergency 24-hour facility as well. You can ease some of their fears by letting them know that mama does do most of the work. And when contractions start, usually the kittens are going to come within 20 minutes apart from each other. If people are noticing that mama cat is still straining and no kitten is coming out, then they need to be on the phone with the veterinary clinic and or possibly driving to get her some help. It seems that many kittens are born in the evening or at nighttime. I usually let my kittens stay content until the next morning, unless there seems to be something obvious, unless they seem really underweight. They might be neonatal or premature rather. But if they're plump and healthy and they're going right to mama and she's nursing and cleaning them, I leave them alone. I leave mama alone. I make sure that she has plenty of food and water, and then the next morning I weigh them to get their baseline weight. And I bring the scale as close to the cage as possible so that mama knows I'm not stealing her kittens. I've actually had a mama take a kitten right back out of my hands when I started removing it from the cage, and do a quick weight, write it down, and get the kitten back in. Again, please make sure that hands are really washed and clean before touching the kittens, as their immune systems aren't developed yet, and we don't want to introduce bacteria or diseases. Mama's health is going to be important. Her nutrition, she's going to go through a lot of calories. Transition her over even before she gives birth. Gradually start adding in kitten food into her regular adult food. She should have dry kibble available all the time. Offer wet food once or twice a day. And make sure that she has clean, fresh water always available. She should be weighed herself also at least twice a week. Mama cats will give their all for their kittens. And oftentimes mama cats, if they're not getting enough nutrition, they can lose weight and actually starve as they're feeding their kittens. So please weigh her twice a week. Check for vaccines, parasite treatments. If they haven't been able to be done before she gave birth, make sure you follow up and that they get done after birth. If you go to UC Davis Shelter Medicine website, there's great information on vaccines and parasite treatments and the protocols for pregnant and nursing moms. And also check her for mastitis. It's a little bit more common that it happens later on, like around 3 weeks when the kittens are in full swing. They're nursing a lot. She's producing a lot of milk, and then they start to wean. But really, mastitis can happen at any time. So when you're weighing the mama cat twice a week, also make sure that they're checking for mastitis. Feel around the nipples. If they're starting to feel firm, if they feel extra warm, if they're red, if mama's been looking at herself a lot, or if she's pushing the kittens away, it may be a sign that she has mastitis and needs to be seen by a veterinarian and get some treatment. Okay, a kind of a wrap-up question. People might have called in and said, I've raised kittens before, anything else that I need to be aware of? This is maybe your last chance to get them that information. Again, make sure the kitten and its environment are scrupulously clean, hands washed, and everything brought into that kitten's environment is clean. Kittens really do need to be weighed every day to make sure they're progressing. And again, it's going to be an early sign of illness if they're not gaining weight, or it will be an indicator that they need to be fed differently. Keep accurate records, daily weight charts, how much and how often the kitten has eaten, what's the consistency of the stool and urine, any signs of illness like lack of weight gain, nasal ocular discharge, decreased appetite, vomiting and diarrhea certainly is a sign of illness and needs to see a veterinarian. Encourage the person to call with updates and also any additional questions they have. Again, we can't tell them everything all at once. They might not even know they have a question until later on when something new comes up. So keep the lines of communication open. And likewise, if you do have their contact information, you might just want to shoot them an email and say, hey, how are things going? I'm thinking about you and your kitten. Do you have any additional questions? And you're also able to provide them with links to additional sites that they can visit on their own time. So some really good resources. There's these next two pages. Alley Cat Allies website has an excellent guide for a visual guide of the kitten's age and progression of its characteristics. And if you can encourage the caller to visit that site and see the pictures of the kittens at various ages, that may also help them better determine the age of the kitten that they're dealing with. You can watch for yourself, and you can direct those who you are trying to help to the webinars that we've just given, the previous 3 plus this one. There are going to be handouts available to accompany the webinars that will be available on the Alley Cat Allies website. We at Feline Outreach, Rescue, and Education are actually redoing our website right now, but we will have information always being added to our website, and there are workshops and DVDs available. And you might want to think about creating a tab on your own website with resources and answers to common questions that you get at your organization. And on that page, you might also have links to some other places where people can find additional information for themselves. Some of those links might be on this page. These over here on the left, the shelter medicine program at both UC Davis and University of Florida have great information on pretty much any kitten or cat topic you could think of, and other topics on other animals as well. So this sheet will also be available to you after the webinar as a handout. So again, we're Feline Outreach, Rescue, and Education. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope that you found this webinar informative and that you'll be able to use the information and pass it on to others who are also trying to help kittens. If you do have any questions or are interested in having a workshop brought to your area, please feel free to contact us. Our information is there, and my specific email information is, my email address is there as well if you wanted to contact me directly. And thank you once again for attending.